Okay, in Chapter 7 now we're starting a new developmental stage. This is called early childhood, and it'll be approximately ages 3 to 6 or so. We'll start by looking at the physical and cognitive developmental issues associated with this time period. All right, the first issue as we look at physical issues is that injuries are the leading cause of mortality. I mean, that really shouldn't be too surprising because children shouldn't be dying from the horrific things such as cancer and health problems and all that obviously older adults are dying from. So what we do want to do, though, is we want to really think about how we can prevent all of these kinds of accidents from happening, because they really are very, very preventable. And you can see that, if you look at this picture here of the car seat, we've come a long way with safety features and helping folks really keep their children safe in, automobiles, etc. So we want to make sure that they're buckled up, that it's appropriate, although they really have discovered that quite a few folks are not strapped correctly in the infant seats. So it's really a good idea to get those checked out and make sure that they are installed correctly. Boys are much more likely to get injured than girls. It's kind of their nature to be more physical, so it's not that shocking. And we have pretty high injury rates in the United States, and a couple of reasons for that includes the high levels of poverty. We talked about poverty in a previous chapter, as you know, chapter 2. And in addition to that, our child care, we have a lot of child care, but they're not all high quality. And the lower quality child care is not having as high level of supervision. And some folks may just not even know, about babies being able to drown, for instance, and children in just a very, very little bit of water. So some of it is just not educationally knowing that it's not okay to leave a toddler in a bathtub even for a minute. And others is just that they don't, maybe just aren't really paying attention enough to supervision issues. The high rates of teenage pregnancy also contributes to this because, as you know, teenagers are not quite ready. And as we get to the adolescent chapter, you'll see why to really be a parent yet. They're still developing and building their decision-making skills. So if we look at the motor skills that are developing, and we talked about gross and fine motor skills before, there's some significant changes that are happening now that they're in early childhood. They are able to do things like starting to ride a bike and throw balls, and they can start to do that a little bit more. In terms of the fine motor skills, they are going to actually start to draw things that might look like something versus a pure scribble because their fine motor skills are also developing. So you'll see that these really do significantly change as time goes on. We're going to shift gears now to cognitive development, and we're going to focus on Piaget. So Piaget has 4 different cognitive periods. The first was sensory motor, which we already visited in the earlier years. Now we're in the early childhood years, and the preoperational period is the one we'll be targeting. This preoperational period is all about the flaws in thinking. So basically it is about what is considered developmentally appropriate, mistakes in their thinking. It's just normal, and it's what most children are experiencing. So they lack a concept called conservation. Conservation means that you know that something is the same even though it looks different. So if you take a look over here at this conservation task, if you showed a child these 2 water beakers here and asked them if they were the same, they would say yes, and they would be correct because they are. And then right in front of them, not like a magic trick, not behind your back, but right in front of them, you even tell them, I'm going to take this bottle here and I am going to pour it into this tall beaker here. And they're like, okay. And then when you ask them, so which one has more water? Children in this developmental period, this 2 to 7 age range, are going to most likely point to this one and say this one. And they'll feel pretty confident about their answer. What they neglected to do was to look at the entire picture. So instead, they had a flaw called centration, which means they zoomed in on only one part, and they only looked at how tall the water was. They neglected to look at how wide the water was. So this is typical during this developmental stage, and I will be posting another video so you can see this in action as well. The other flaw that contributes to this is irreversibility. It means they can't mentally picture what would it look like if I took this water and I poured it back into this glass. Would they be the same? They don't yet have that cognitive capability. Another really important flaw is the egocentrism, and this is the limited ability to see something from another person's point of view. And again, I'm going to show you another video in the bookmark section so you can get a better handle on this concept of egocentrism. So a great example of this is hide and go seek. You know, a young child playing hide and go seek with you may do exactly what this little boy here is doing and just put his hands over his face and think he's hidden because he can't see you. So from his perception, it looks like you can't see him, which we all know is not true. However, that's what they do. So you can see that that's a great example of egocentrism, because they really can't see the world from the other person's point of view. We'll be talking a lot more about that concept because it's really very, very critical in some other concepts such as self-esteem and game playing and things of that nature. A couple of other flaws, animism, they think things are living, so they're going to give names to their teddy bears, and they're going to get very upset if you put their teddy bear in the closet because, my gosh, it can't breathe in there, right? He needs air to breathe. So you'll see them kind of thinking that things that are not alive are alive. So if it's howling, the wind, they might say, why is that wind so mad? Well, the wind isn't alive and it doesn't experience emotions, but they've kind of given it the personal qualities, even though it doesn't really warrant them. And the last one here is absolute finalism. That's when they mix up cause and effect. So if you ask them a question like, why did it snow? They're going to say, so I can build a snowman. Well, that's not really the reason it snowed, but it is a consequence of snowing. So they kind of just get that logic mixed up. And again, that's very, very typical during this pre-operational period. So now we're going to talk about Vygotsky. I mentioned him in the last chapter, and I want to talk a little bit more in depth about his theory. It's a very, very important one. Vygotsky focuses on the sociocultural theory. And he says Piaget is on target. Oops, sorry about that. I just clicked the wrong button. Piaget is on target with looking at cognitive development, but Vygotsky says you can't look at it in isolation. He says if you want to explore cognitive development in children, you're going to have to look at the socio-cultural variables, the situation, the environment, etc., and also language. So he says you really need to look at all three of these simultaneously in order to fully understand cognitive development. So if we take a look at language first, he says there's a concept called private speech. And he says talking to yourself is a really important part of cognitive development. So what happens here is that if you watch children processing something in a cognitive way, you'll see that most of the time they're talking it out loud. So, let's just say they're counting blocks and they're counting to 10. Most of them are going to shout out 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're going to count that way. Now, you and I don't really need to do that. We can kind of do it mentally and privately. So basically what he says is that speech ends up becoming private, but at first it's out loud, so first we're talking it out loud. Now, even as grown-ups, we will sometimes talk something out loud, especially if we're in the midst of something pretty complicated. You may have found yourself kind of talking it out loud. And that's because language helps us solve cognitive problems or tasks. So it's pretty important. I wanted to mention this sidebar I have over here. Dr. Barkley is kind of an expert. He's clearly one of the nationally known experts on ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I've had the pleasure of seeing Dr. Barkley a number of times give professional presentations. And he made this one interesting analogy that I wanted to bring to your attention about private speech and ADHD. And basically what he hypothesizes is that children with ADHD don't develop their private speech as quickly as children without ADHD. So if you know one of the symptoms of ADHD is often calling out a lot in class, not waiting your turn, and part of that he believes is just really due to the fact that they haven't yet privatized their speech, so they're still talking everything out loud. It does come, but it doesn't come as quickly is basically what he believes. Now back to Vygotsky. So Vygotsky, we understand now, has a sociocultural theory that's zooming in on language and cognitive development and social variables all at once. Well, there's two key concepts of his theory. One is the zone of proximal development. And basically what that is it's a task that a child can't do yet by himself or herself, but could do if they had help and support. So it's kind of something within reach is the way you would want to think about it. And then that support is called scaffolding. So what kind of help would that child need in order to accomplish what they need to accomplish? And that is the scaffold. You see here there's a picture of a bicycle with training wheels. So a child may not be able to ride a bike independently yet, but if you provide them with a scaffold such as the training wheels, then they may be able to be successful at it. And that's going to be really important because it's important for children to have tasks within their zone of proximal development and also have the support that they need so they can develop a strong sense of themselves and feel good about what they're able to develop. The last thing I want to mention from this chapter is language. It is just exploding. I mean, if you've been around a child in the 3 to 6 age range, you know that they are just learning more words like just about every second of the day. So their vocabulary is really increasing significantly. They still do have problems with the way in which they use language. So for one example I'll mention, it's called overregulation. And that's when they've learned some kind of rule, like you put an S at the end of something to make it plural, yet they're using that rule when it doesn't apply because, in the English language you have all kinds of exceptions to the rules. So they might say something like my 2 feet. And that means they're applying their rule. They know that rule exists, but we wouldn't put my 2 feet. We would just say my 2 feet. So feet would also serve as the plural there without the S. And instead of my toy broke, my toy braked, because they, again, know that rule of putting ED at the end, put it in past tense. So I encourage you to take a look at the text on all of these topics, but in particular, take a little bit more time to look at some of that language development. It really is very, very cool how we go from not being able to speak at all to really having a pretty significant vocabulary.